Welcome to the Not Old Better Show. I'm your host, Paul Vogelsang. As part of our Smithsonian Associates Art of Living series, our guest today on the Not Old Better Show is John Prados. John Prados will be at the Ripley Center in Washington, D.C., January 18th, 2018, to discuss his new book about the CIA, titled The Ghosts of Langley. By its very nature, the Central Intelligence Agency is an organization whose operations and history are necessarily cloaked in secrecy. What can outsiders really expect to learn about how the agency operates?
The book really is the central thing. In The Ghosts of Langley, it tells the story of how key figures in CIA history really have helped the agency to decouple itself from government accountability.
That was our guest today, John Prados. Through a critical examination of CIA leaders past and present, Prados offers a window into the often unknowable workings of the world of Langley. Join me in welcoming to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates Series via Skype, John Prados. Well, Mr. John Prados, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, of course, your new book, The Ghosts of Langley, has ghosts in the title. Who or what are the CIA ghosts?
The CIA ghosts are those people that really sort of set the tone and set the pace for the agency as it moved through its 70 years of history. And they range from top people like Alan Dulles, one of the first directors, and how he sort of built a house for the agency, to rank and file people like the fellow who went ashore with the first wave at the Bay of Pigs, who ends up stepping on the shores of Cuba where all the top CIA officials had assured the president and his White House officials that no Americans would be involved in any way.
I have heard you speak previously, and you mentioned the Bay of Pigs. I've heard you describe John Kennedy, President John Kennedy, as one of the ghosts. And is that because of the Bay of Pigs, or is that because of the assassination? What relationship does John Kennedy have into some of the ghosts?
John Kennedy angle is a fascinating one, and it's one that we're not going to get to the bottom of in this book or even sometime soon. But his relationship to the ghosts is one that he himself created. You know, Kennedy was so intensely involved in efforts to fight Castro. And even when the Bay of Pigs fails, his response to that is not to pack up the operation, but in fact to take it to another level. In the entire period between 1961 and when he is assassinated in late 1963. In fact, not long before the Kennedy assassination, less than 2 weeks before, he sat down for a direct briefing from top CIA officials and the organizers of the Cuba operation for the first time directly. Now, if you know about CIA covert operations, you know that one of the main themes has long been that a president should have plausible deniability. That is, he should be able to say he had nothing to do with the operation. But here we've got John F. Kennedy in November 1963 actually meeting with the CIA on the Cuba operation and approving the next set of targets. When people talk about the Kennedy assassination, one of the theories has long been that somehow the Cubans went after Kennedy. And certainly Castro knew that the CIA was going after him. So when you see Kennedy engaged like this, that leaves you pause. You know, you wonder, was Kennedy a CIA ghost because of this CIA operation?
So you mentioned covert CIA actions. What are some of the most troubling covert CIA actions from around the world?
Well, this is a thing that goes back through the decades, and different decades there are different CIA operations that are really troubling. Something that is kind of of concern at the moment, which goes back to 1953, is the operation that the agency carried out in Iran. And American relations with Iran have been touchy off and on for years, and here we're at another rough patch. The whole Iranian hostage crisis and a lot of that dead wood and bad blood might have been avoided if there wasn't a CIA operation. In the 60s, of course, you have the Cuba thing that we were just talking about. In the 70s, there was a CIA operation. Here again with the Iranians, an operation carried out purely for the pleasure of the Shah of Iran at that time, to arm the Kurds, to fight the Syrians, and lo and behold, we're back there again too. In the 80s, you have the operations in Nicaragua, which messed up U.S. relations with Latin America for years, and in Afghanistan, where you can argue that there's a direct relation between Americans supporting fundamentalist Muslims in Afghanistan in the 1980s and what comes back to haunt us and bite us in the new millennium with 9/11. And in 9/11, of course, we've got the CIA's interrogation and detainee program, which is a serious problem, and it's where the ghost of Langley actually begins.
Well, some of these CIA covert operations are now coming to light through your research into some of the newly declassified documents. From your research, should we think of CIA agents and these CIA operators as heroes or villains?
I think that CIA officers are disciplined government officials who follow their orders. I don't think we need to think of CIA's personnel as heroes or as villains, except in relation to the specific activities that they're concerned with. Certain CIA operators did great things in the context of operations. Did the operation turn out well for the United States and for U.S. foreign policy? Maybe it did. Maybe it did not. But they can still have been heroic within the context of what they achieved or did not.
Why has there been so much difficulty in oversight of the CIA?
That's an excellent question. I think that the agency has had a natural proclivity to avoid, in fact, they have a word for it, flap, to, when a flap occurs, take preventative action, take avoiding action, and try and argue their way out of it, so that over the course of time, these ghosts that we're talking about actually were people who helped articulate some of the arguments that have been used with reference to oversight. For example, in 1952 and 1953, the CIA carried out not just that Iran operation that led to subsequent problems, but it also carried out, this was the tail end of U.S. operations directly against the Soviet Union in Russia, and of a lengthy covert operation that we carried out in Albania. And there was a major case where the Russians snookered the CIA in Poland and got the Americans to contribute money and information to what was really a false flag KGB operation. When they blew that up, the guy who was in charge of operations for the CIA, a fellow named Frank Wisner, chose to argue and attempted to argue that really the problem with covert operations was that there wasn't enough presidential guidance. There wasn't enough top-level information or concern. Much like, actually, the example of Kennedy sitting down with the Cuba operators. Anyway, the first major investigation of CIA covert activities was one that was ordered by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was the president at that time. And he assembled a group under General James Doolittle to look into CIA covert operations. And one of his specific assignments to that group was to look at this question of top-level guidance for CIA covert operations. Well, needless to say, the Doolittle Committee concluded that the top-level guidance had been good. But that argument then became a marker point at the Bay of Pigs when the CIA reacted to presidential criticism and public criticism of the CIA for the hapless failure at the Bay of Pigs. One of the arguments that agency officers made was, in fact, they hadn't had enough top-level guidance. Similarly, actually with that same Doolittle Commission, one of the things that agency people did to object to the Doolittle Commission was that answering its questions was soaking up so much of their time that they weren't getting real work done. You fast forward to the Bay of Pigs, and again, the answers of CIA officers to the Kennedy administration about why they weren't making progress on covert actions against Castro, one of those answers was that they were spending all their time responding to Kennedy's investigations of the CIA after the Bay of Pigs. And you could fast forward again to the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s. The same argument was employed again to defend the CIA against outside investigation.
We are with John Prados, author of the book, The Ghosts of Langley. Mr. Prados, I just have two more questions for you. The first has to do with kind of the Red Scare and Senator McCarthy's hearings about communist sympathizers and the various investigations. Was the CIA prompting and assisting Senator McCarthy during that time?
No, I don't believe it was. In fact, it was one of his targets. He went after an agency analyst who was related by marriage to people that McCarthy did not like.
My last question is maybe kind of right out of the pages of today and has to do with fake news. Do you think it'd be fair to say that the CIA uses this tactic of fake news?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's worth thinking about. We have an agency. Part of its job is to conduct deception operations and propaganda operations, and part of that work is to explicitly create fake news, which they attempt to insert into the public discourse. I am not sure that that's the same sense of fake news in which we discuss the fake news that's thrown up at us each day these days. But in functional terms, these are very similar things. And to the extent that the agency engages in creating fake news for the specific purpose of protecting itself, then yes, that's real fake news.
Mr. John Prados is joining us today. He's the author of the new book, The Ghosts of Langley. He's authored several other books. We'll put links up to John Prados, his website, and these books on our pages, but I could talk to you for a long time, John Prados, but I know you're very busy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
My thanks to our guest today, John Prados, who will be presenting stories from the book The Ghosts of Langley at the Ripley Center in Washington, D.C., January 18th, 2018. John Prados' book will be available for purchase and signing following the presentation. More information can be found at our website. My thanks as well to the Smithsonian team for all they do to support our interviews. And as usual, we'll post links to everything. And also, as usual, my thanks to you, the listeners, for joining me today. Your time is valuable, and I'm grateful you're spending some of it with me today. I'm always interested in feedback, and you can leave that at iTunes, Google Play, or send me an email at info@notold-better.com. Stay tuned for our next show, another great one, as we talk about better. The Not Old Better Show. Thanks to all, and remember, offer some kindness, service, and love to everyone you meet. You'll never regret it, and you'll make a difference. Thank you.